Welcome to Design Emergency, the podcast and platform that Alice Rawsthorne and I, Paola Antonelli, founded in 2020 to highlight the fundamental role of design in all aspects of life and its potential to help tackle emergencies of all kinds towards a better future. Our guest today, Abeer Seikaly, is a Jordanian-Palestinian architect. In her case, however, this practical characterization is a bit blunt and inaccurate. And in truth, and I'm using her words here, she is an interdisciplinary thinker and maker who works across architecture, design, fine art, and cultural production. So welcome to Design Emergency, Abeer.
Thank you for having me, Paola. I'm so happy to be speaking with you today.
Again, because we speak all the time. We really love to. So, having come to know and love both you and your work a few years back when we first met, I have also grown to consider you a champion of the kind of design activism that Alice and I want to celebrate and expose to the world. Because you draw inspiration from traditional Arab knowledge, but you also view your practice as a social technology for cultural empowerment. And whenever I look at your work, Abir, either your poignant collaboration with Bedouin women in the Jordanian Badia desert, for instance, or many others, I think of the political power of design. Its power to lift communities, to give pride, to weave social fabrics, and you charge everything you do with a deep love of people and tradition. So I would like to ask you about your personal history. Where does your passion come from?
Well, first of all, Paula, I would like to say that, throughout my career, I've been questioning notions of home and shelter in response to postmodernity and cultural heritage. For me, it all started actually when I was 5 years old. My dad's best friend, who was also an architect, came to our house and brought an architectural model he had made to our apartment. It was a model of our future home, and over the next 2 years, I watched this miniature version gradually transform into the actual space we now inhabit, with my father leading the construction efforts. And
That's in Amman, right?
that's in Amman, yeah. And this memory really dwells within me wherever I go. It really never left me, and it just sparked my interest and connection to the creative process, and it kind of instilled within me this deep respect for building and construction. But I think what's fascinating for me is that beyond, this model's physical presence in our living room, this experience taught me that, every plan or blueprint or model holds this promise of translating this idea into reality. And it wasn't, until, of course, ninth grade in a very valuable course that I took called Craft Design and Technology, that my design awareness, truly began to form. Within this class, I learned problem solving through, creativity, planning, and design, and honed skills like resourcefulness, critical thinking, and how to communicate in the design process. So it started forming a solid foundation for the way I think about design. And for me, I think the final achievement in this class was designing and constructing a family house extension where I earned the highest mark worldwide. And this recognition really motivated me and solidified, my determination to pursue design for the rest of my life. And I think these childhood experiences are very valuable, and they just kind of.
I can't believe how old is one in ninth grade? Because I never can calculate. So ninth
Ninth
grade is what?
grade
Like,
would be about 15, probably 14, 15, I would say, 15 years old.
so what kind of school? I mean, it's amazing that somebody teaches that because, unless you choose a particular high school in Italy, nobody teaches
Mhm,
you, despite the tradition,
mhm.
this kind of thinking. So that's amazing that you had that kind of teaching.
It was part of an IGCSE curriculum syllabus. And truly, this class truly changed my life, I would say. But craftsmanship has really been central to my upbringing and practice. And again, from a young age, and I always go back to childhood, I was observing my grandmother and my mother, creating beautiful things from scratch. They were transforming materials into works of art. So it wasn't about making objects. It was, and I say this, of course, in reflection, it was about connecting with each other and with our
And it
surroundings.
was about life also,
Of
right? It
course, it was
wasn't
about commitment, dedication, about hard work. And these have inspired me and made me curious about the stories behind each creation. And as I grew older, I found myself slowly drawn to, this expressive potential of various mediums and these nuanced ways in which materials could evoke emotion and meaning, and it's this curiosity, I believe, that led me to the desert, where I discovered the rich traditions that defined my family's way of life. So
it's so beautiful. And it's like you love baggage, right? Your practice is grounded in acts of memory, as you say, in journaling, in documenting, in archiving, in collecting. And you say that you read backwards while
mhm,
writing forwards and that you weave
mhm,
these narrative threads from these memories. So, can
mhm,
you give us an example in your work?
mhm. Well, I've been journaling from a very young age, and I think writing for me has become a tool for creative thinking. I've been collecting since a very young age, and it really started in my bedroom, where I would create this environment for myself that made me, because it was an intimate space. The bedroom is kind of like I always say that my bedroom was my first studio space, and it was the place where my diaries were, where the perfume bottles that I collected were, where my clothes were. So these were the things that kind of, I would say, defined my world as a child. And slowly, as I started traveling, I started kind of collecting those things. And remember, Paula, I was living in Jordan. And so we didn't have much access to many things. One of my aunts was living in France, another was living in the US. So I was always gathering these things that were given to me as gifts, or that I was collecting through my travels and journeys with my family. And so this has become kind of like a ritual for me, to collect, to organize things, which eventually really transformed into my studio space, which became grounded within this mindset. So it became kind of this tapestry of my personal memory. And it's very clear, like you see the things that I've documented, that I've collected and archived, and that's continuously being woven. And each item in my studio, whether it's, made by nature or made by my own hands or the hands of, others, carries this piece of the past. And together, they compose this narrative, this, I would say, performative score. And I'm actually a musician as well, or I was a
Oh
musician.
my God, I didn't know
So
that.
so
Also musician, forget
yes,
about it.
music was a very important part of my life. So that's kind of what shaped my present and future. It was manifested through these objects that I imagined and the objects I made. So it becomes kind of like a vessel, whether the bedroom, whether the studio space, or a home, becomes really a vessel of these experiences.
So the living room with the model of your home, the kitchen, the work with your grandmother and your mother, your bedroom, you brought this love of intimacy also to your work with the Bedouin women in the desert, in the Badia desert. You talk about the intimacy of handmaking as the lead, as the thread through your collaboration with them. So, how did the collaboration with the Bedouin women come about, and what did you learn from them?
First of all, historically, women wove their homes, which is in Arabic, it's called Beit al Sha'ar. Of course, when we talk about the Bedouin tent, in Arabic, if you say the word tent, it's kind of very offensive. They consider it as a home. And they wove these homes using locally available materials and tools, which with the craftsperson's body, or the women being kind of a vital instrument in the creative process. But also, what's very unique and special was that the site of making was also very much intrinsic to the tent itself. materials were sourced from indigenous animals, and the tools reflected the surrounding environment. And these principles and connections, guided my practice through engaging with cultural heritage. I became very fascinated with that. And I also became fascinated with that because I've also inherited a rug that was hand woven by my great grandmother, who was a Bedouin weaver and a tent maker. And so this prompted me to go back and start digging into my origins. And, living in Jordan and coming from a space and from a family that has been displaced throughout history, from Palestine, or whether it's being displaced from the desert or from a rural area to an urban area. That's another form of displacement. I was always searching for the sense of belonging. And so that rug that I inherited kind of became that connection to the desert. And also in today's world where, technology often dominates our lives, I think, redefining the idea of craft is more important than ever. It's about reclaiming the human element in design and embracing those imperfections that make everything that we create special and unique, and honoring the traditions that are passed down through the generations. So, craft to me became a mindset, more of a commitment to infusing every project with care, with intention, with connection, with authenticity, as I witnessed in my family's craft, and as I described to you.
When you reached out to
Mm,
the Bedouin women, did your grandmother introduce you, or how did it come about? And when I met you, you were working on this project called Weaving a Home, which was truly about using the
mm,
kind of like savvy and wisdom of Bedouin women to make
mm,
a home
mhm,
for yourself, for others, something that could go
mhm,
also outside in the world. So
mhm,
how did that conversation with the women come about? Were they
mhm,
surprised, or it was
mhm.
just a natural intimacy that developed?
No, I think with weaving a home, when I designed weaving a home, my design was based on model making and was also based on research about the Bedouin tent and about nomadic way of living. And so it was more, I was existing more in the theoretical space, right? And as I began developing weaving a home and interacting with you know, different people from all around the world, I started realizing that what I was creating is not a product. It is a social process. It is a social technology and a cultural practice. And this kind of took me to wanting to explore deeply and in situ, being present physically, and understanding exactly how these Bedouin tents were made. And so this is kind of what took me down to the desert, back to kind of interacting and finding these women, asking questions, and spending a lot of time with them, trying to understand what those weaving practices were all about. Because the question for me with weaving a home was that, yes, I designed this structural fabric and this material system that was imbued with all of these different ideas about its performability, about it being energy efficient, about it collecting water and all of that, and about creating dignified shelter. But then one of the questions that always boggled me was, how am I going to make this? What material am I going to use? And so my time with the Bedouins in Jordan taught me so many things. And one of the things that continues to resonate with me in that process was that even in tough times, creativity can thrive. So, again, going back to the tent structure itself, it is not about creating a product and providing it to a community. The question for me became about how can we make a community thrive through teaching them how to build, and through designing these structures and these shelters with them. And the Bedouins, see the desert as a provider and adapt to survive through collaboration and resourcefulness. Learning from their heritage, teaches us or taught me to make the best of what I have, and I've always operated that way. That's why I often rely on what I also call a creative compass in my work, because it helps me tackle these challenges and also remain flexible. So, like the Bedouins, I kind of started seeing scarcity more as a driver for creativity, pushing me to think differently about the world. And it also prompted me to think about something that affected me deeply again as a child. When I was in school, I was always taught and told that Jordan is a resource poor country. And many, 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 many years later, I realized that this concept really debilitated my belief in myself and the potential of what I can create. And I started questioning what kind of society, talks about itself as being poor. Jordan actually is a resource rich country, but it really depends on how you're defining what resources are. Yeah, I'm always asking, how creative thinking can address these issues that we face today and change our views. It's really about changing, your perspective and finding new ways to use traditional knowledge, I would say, to deal with contemporary issues. And so, if we want to talk about Jordan being a resource poor country, sure. If you want to think about it not having oil, that's not the case. If you look back at the Bedouin traditions, then you can see the richness in that culture.
Yeah. And scarcity as a space for creative thinking is the tenet of design. I mean, it's about
Mhm.
uh, using the limits that you have at your disposal. And actually, from your collaboration with the Bedouin women came a work that I lust over, as you know, which is Meeting Points, this gigantic, beautiful structure that now belongs to the Queen of Jordan. So I don't
Mhm.
think I can ever have it, but
Mhm.
it really is touching. So the importance of cultural heritage, the importance of local wisdom. You experimented with it in Jordan, of course, but how do we extrapolate it to a global society?
What I've realized is that what I'm creating is actually a shelter building process. Right, so I'm working with a creative process here. I always reference the words of Pritzker laureate Wang Shu, who said, "A lost tradition means a lost future." And this really became, these words really epitomize the beliefs that have been at the core of my practice. And they touch on this idea of circularity, which has become the leading principle in setting out, the methodology for my architectural and artistic practice. And so when I talk about circularity again, like when I talk about crafts, I speak of it as an approach and an attitude towards cultural contexts that are constantly evolving, across time, space, affecting society, the economy, and the environment. And so, for me, the question here becomes: is how do we deal with these ever evolving changes? How do we understand or begin understanding this complex web of relations? Because and therefore, how can I translate and transmit these creative learnings to other cultures as well? Obviously, it's not going to be replicating those models as they are, because every context has its own specificity. It has its own production methods, its own people, its own materials, its own climate, its own soil, and so on. And so, this is why,
I like how you've been working also with glass makers in Murano lately, which is very
yes,
beautiful. I like this fact that you have an attitude of respect and trust also to other traditions.
absolutely. And so for me, it became more about, okay, maybe this is about a creative way of thinking. And so, how can I begin outlining a methodology and a curriculum or a syllabus, an educational way of thinking creatively that I actually enact through my own creative compass? And this is, this is where we go back to, my rituals and my acts of documenting, journaling, and because it becomes intentional. These acts of memory become a way for me to become more aware of my positionality within the world, right? And where I stand in relation to the world. And it allows me to interpret things in a very specific way. And so this compass that I talked about, it becomes a means and it offers a way for people to act on their environment through different aspects. Mine personally are sociocultural aspect that I look at. So, for example, that becomes the lens through which I respond to traditional and cultural contexts, fostering social integration and sustainable relationships. I'm always considering the environmental element, when I use natural resources in my work to adapt and respond to these urgent environmental conditions. Then there's the technical and the economical elements, is where I learn from, indigenous technologies and knowledge systems and integrate, these local economies and supply chains into my cultural practices. So that's my own creative compass. And what I'm becoming more interested in is finding ways in which to translate those creative processes. Because I think, one thing that I've been, this whole idea of design thinking, for example, is used a lot. And sometimes at one point I felt that I needed to break away from this methodology because it kind of removed.
Thank you for doing so. I've always been against.
I'm against it. It's how do you, every person has their unique way of expressing themselves, whether it's through artistic expression, whether it's through writing, through living, and so on. So, how can I create this instrument or this device or this methodology where we can begin having others find ways to express their own actions within the space in which they exist?
Yeah. Design thinking is almost the expression of the kind of toxic globalization that we're
Absolutely.
discussing.
Absolutely.
You've been talking about these very intimate acts that are about your experience, your surroundings, your tradition. But then you also have gone very public, being one of the co founders of Amman Design Week, which started in 2016. Can you
Mhm.
tell us about that experience?
Mhm. Well, first of all, my involvement in art and culture, began in 2010 when I returned back to Jordan after working in the Gulf region for many years. I co-founded, the first contemporary art fair in Jordan alongside an incredible team of individuals. It was called the Sunny Art Fair, and it was a curated program of exhibitions, lectures, and activities that contributed to the discourse and awareness of art culture in Jordan, with thematics of dialogue and conversation. And this is, I would say, the first time I posed a question, or the question of what is art in Jordan? And this question all of a sudden became a question of authenticity in this context of, diasporic influence and this urgency to engage in, a vernacular voice that's not borrowed from other contexts. And so that took me then to co-founding and co-directing Amman Design Week, which was part of my conscious engagement with cultural production. I wanted to explore my society's, culture and identity, and also learn about that through cultural programming. So it aimed. Amman Design Week aimed at elevating local and regional design through, these collaborative initiatives and inclusive environments, but it also provided a platform for me to initiate other community center projects, which were aimed at, preserving cultural heritage through these collective building efforts that go beyond the borders of the city. So again, just I'm going to be jumping back and forth here, but my collaborations, with these Bedouin women and these communities across Jordan, celebrating these local traditions and integrating contemporary design principles, it took me back to Amman Design Week as a participant. So here I am now experiencing the whole cycle. And not only was I leading my own cultural experience programs in Amman, but even being in Design Doha, Amman Design Week and Design Doha each operate within their distinctive contexts and frameworks, but they're products of their respective, periods or decades. And while they're geographically and chronologically separated, they're united in their genuine fostering of Arab design. So participating, for example, in Amman Design Week as a designer or as an artist or even at Design Doha, it felt like, they were kind of connected. Design Doha for me felt like it was a spiritual successor of Amman Design Week, and a reunion with many of the alumni from Amman Design Week. And this is kind of these cyclical events or experiences are what I'm interested in placing myself in different positions in order for me to understand the design process, design thinking, in order for me to connect with people and really create meaningful refinements in the work that I'm actually doing, and what I'm contributing to.
The very fruitful side of all these design weeks and triennials and biennials in design that are
Mm-hmm.
happening in different parts of the world is that they expose to people what really is the richness of a
Mm-hmm.
place. And I'm talking about,
Mm-hmm.
of course, Amman and Doha, where I just saw recently your
Mm-hmm.
work, and also about Copenhagen and many others. I'm from Milan, so the design week par excellence used to be Milan, and I'm so glad that it's now diversified, complemented, and also sometimes bested by other design weeks. So another interesting project that you have enterprised as a cultural producer is Alma Mar, which is a series of residencies in Amman. Can you please tell us about Alma Mar?
Mm-hmm. The primary aim of Al Mamar, by the way, means passage. So it's kind of like the rites of passage for me, moving from one experience to the next, from one place to the next. And that's where the name comes from. And the primary aim of it was to provide a platform for communal building and cultural practices through the repurposing of abandoned buildings and the adaptation of cultural traditions. And in its first year, well, it still is operating within what I call a cultural shell. It's a building that dates back to 1949, that's located in Amman's historic neighborhood of Jabal al Webde. And it seeks to challenge this conventional approach of program seeks building by reversing this notion to building seeks programs. So I started off with programming this abandoned site in order for me to understand exactly what the site wants to be or what it wants to become. And this is also a continuous process. So, uh, what's been happening with Al Mamar is a series of interactive exhibitions and events that aim to foster creativity, critical arts practice, and an exploration of traditional values within the context of Jordan. And it plays a vital role in supporting as well local craft and design scene by providing opportunities for experimentation and innovation, and also the revitalization of urban spaces. So the question for me is, how can we use these abandoned spaces and old buildings and repurpose them into new programs by engaging the community and thinking about new uses for these, much like what I'm trying to do as well with traditional practices, and how to kind of make them relevant within contemporary design. One thing that I would like to add onto that, Paula, is that my interest in cultural production is going to very strange places. Of course, again, inspired by this whole idea of the Bedouin tent and movement and mobility. I'm starting to think now about movement a lot, about notions of permanence, where I'm not only considering, the physical and material aspects, but also the cultural and ecological impacts of these programs that we're doing, the exhibitions that we're designing, and their impact and the impacts of buildings on the environment. And this is again manifested through the other shelters that I'm actually developing right now, like terroir, and I can talk more about that. But that's kind of like an idea that's also in the making, and questions that I've been thinking about cultural production and what is it and why does it have to be confined within a certain location.
I like what you said before about a different kind of circularity and a different kind of sustainability, because the importance of maintaining local making tradition shows us the interconnectedness of life on this planet. And tradition often is responsible making. So Thank you for teaching us that we can still extract responsibly and dispose sensibly. Thank you for being here, Abeer.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Paola. Thank you so much.
This is Design Emergency, and you have just heard from Abeer Seikaly, architect, designer, interdisciplinary thinker and maker, entrepreneur, passionate advocate of local crafts and traditions, and of their crucial role in the contemporary world. And you can find images of Abeer's work in our Instagram feed at design.emergency. And you can also dig through our archives to find more interviews by myself and by my co founder, Alice Rawsthorne, with designers, architects, and others who are actively working to prepare a better world for all humans, for all species, and for all planets. Thank you for listening.